Hello and welcome to episode 1 in our 2019-2020 season review. I always look back at the previous season's results just to see how it actually panned out throughout the season and how that ended up towards the spring festivals. I know that Daryl likes to go through the races too, so we thought we'd put our heads together, we'd talk about it together open on air, record it, put it out there for you guys to see, and hopefully point you guys in the right direction of how things might pan out. So first of all, thank you for joining me, Daryl. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Very good, mate. I'm excited to get on with this, to get the review bit done, because I do need to get caught up a bit. I need to get on with the festival stuff, but obviously we're going to be starting right at the beginning of the season. Now, I think the season opener at Chepstow is normally the marker where we say the season started for National Hunt. There are a few races, graded races, listed races that happened before that. So they're in this first episode for the sake of padding out October, because there's not that much action going on. And then we'll move on to each month after that. And it actually pans out that things like November, December, there's so much action on, they'll be split into two parts. And of the races that we'll be looking at, it's all graded races. So grade 1s, grade 2s, grade 3s in Ireland and England, or Britain. Listed handicaps, so listed races as well, and then selected other races. They're all taken from Wikipedia's list of National Hunt races for GB and Ireland. And there is loads of other stuff that we could potentially talk about as well. So when we get to some of these meetings, we'll be talking about what else ran the same day, stuff like that. But the fact is we can't go through every single race and every single horse in this review, otherwise it will go on for hours. So with that said, I've got some, like the Summer Cup at Uttoxeter, we've got some stuff that happened at Galway, more for the fact that I know people talk about it and they look at horses that win races and think what might pan out for the rest of the season. But I feel like we're better to jump into the stuff that happened after that. I think we're better to start looking at sort of October onwards. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, if you like. It's probably worth noting that we should mention this is the first time we are going through these. So just to let everybody know, this is our first reactions of these, looking back at most of these.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, like we both like to prepare for stuff, and I know you especially like to do it, especially being a professional now. But I do think it's also important that we do capture it as we're like sort of as we're seeing it. So there's a video replay that I'm going to put up next up on here, which shows the races we'll be covering in this particular episode, the finishes. It's about 5 minutes worth of the video. The only reason it might not show up is if YouTube decide to try and bin me off with it. So if that does happen, there'll be a link to the Facebook page. But all being well, the races we're about to go through will start now. And if you don't want to see it, you can just skip the video a few minutes. I'll put a link to the skip bit. So fingers crossed.
Race on the near side, the leader is the run to the finish. It's going to win the plate. Another edition for Gordon Elliott, ridden by Luke Dempsey, Black Contender. Tudor City in the centre with a wet sail to win the Guinness Galway Hurdle. And the finish, Wicklow Brave, one of racing's favourites, is cutting up chase wins for William.
Terms, Scarlet Dragon staying on best of all and wins the Prelude Hurdle.
And it's Jingle in the lead from Due Reward, and Jingle will repeat wins over fences. But this is Snow Falcon's time of year, has won impressively the PWC Champion Chase.
But David's Charm makes a winning start over fences, wins, he's down under Philip Henry.
Safely over his turnpike trip, lefties, Hindwan's in it. Razul on the far side has every chance now. Turnpike trip, Razul is coming on the rail, but Turnpike trip has fought back. The odds to go, put the kettle on, and Robin DeCarlo on the near side as they run to the finish. Robin DeCarlo lifts
flight. Fiddler on the Roof is about to be headed by Time Hill halfway up the run, and it's Time Hill under Richard Johnson who will go on to take the Persian War. Tank and Jarvis Plate is galloping on strongly out in front. He's put 4 lengths between himself and Reserve Tank. The outsider of 3, Jarvis the Steel. He landed 3 lengths clear, but Champagne Court is trying to bridge the gap. Imperial Aura is 3rd, and All Right Jack is 4th. Out in front is Flash the Steel. Flash the Steel wins the silver trophy.
Darver Star, far side fast buck as they go to the line. Darver Star and Jonathan Moore will continue on his winning ways, wins by a little over a length.
It is Jan Math who's going to resume winning ways in an incident-packed Ladbrokes, Acaboosti, Buckhouse, Novice. Jet on the near side of Alpha de Zobo. They've pushed aside Balkan to Flow and 2A Permy inside the last 100. And it's Jet and Robbie Parr. Alpha de Zobo's battling back at the finish. They've gone by together, Jet and Alpha de Zobo.
Furlong, Monsieur Lecoq has always travelled well. He's sticking the old neck out to in second position Le President. Monsieur Lecoq and Le President to the line. It's very tight.
Pacify on the run, and he's made all. There's just no stopping him. Pacify wins for the Duchess of Cornwall in third, but Silver Streak makes a winning start to a new season, taking the Matchbook VIP hurdle in commanding fashion.
As they race around what would have been the final fence, and Forest Bean goes on now from Kalashnikov. Frodon has been left behind, and Forest Bean showing the superior turn of foot on this long run in, and he begins to clear away, and it's Forest Bean for Brian Hughes and Brian Ellison who wins the Monet's Garden Old Roan.
So either the video worked and you've just watched the races, or you've had to pause it, go to Facebook and watch it, or you've skipped because you're not interested. But anywho, without further ado, we're going to start getting into stuff. So those races I was talking about skipping over, it might seem a bit harsh to do it because there's some nice horses that win there. Things like Arroman, for example, that's won the Galway Hurdle this season. Everyone's banging on about him being a champion hurdle horse. I just think when you look historically, the horses that are winning those sorts of races aren't, I don't think they're festival type horses. Now, I could be being blanket and harsh to something like Arroman the way that he won, but I don't care. That's what I'm saying. So we're going to move straight on. The first race that we'll be looking at is the Gowran Park Champion Chase where Snow Falcon won. So that was over 2.5 miles at Gowran Park. Anything in particular of note you thought from the performance, or any thoughts what it might have been like for the rest of the season after?
No, not really. To be honest, at that time of the year, especially in Ireland, it's sort of a bit of I let it wash over me, really. Like you mentioned about summer jumps, etc. I know this is the start of October, and it's starting to pick up. But I try and keep my powder dry over in Ireland as much as possible until they come over here, or until they've at least got a bit of form, substance. Snow Falcon's one of those horses, though. You always know he could win a race of that sort of nature, but you can never really be strongly for him or strongly against him. So
it's one of them as well. I think it says it. Well, it does. It says it in the video clip. The commentator says it. This is Snow Falcon's time of year, so there'll be a lot of horses that would be featured. When this becomes like an annual thing and we do it over and over again, we might start seeing the same horses winning at certain times of the year. The Like a Butterfly Novice Chase, where Robin DiCarlo won that. The horse I was going to mention to the next episode was actually second, half a length in that race. Put the Kettle On. Put the Kettle On ran quite a few chases over that time of the season, but I just remember looking back at that point, and I don't even think I was that fussed about an interest in the race at all. I definitely didn't think I was looking at potential Arkle winners back then.
No, definitely not. But I think last year, I know we're going to accidentally mention Cheltenham throughout this, but I think last year's Arkle was obviously a below par renewal. The thing is, a lot of these summer jump horses and etc. They can win these races in the beginning of October because they do have a race fitness edge over a lot of them. So when you're punting, sometimes you need to take that into consideration. The fact that race fitness is a massive advantage for a horse. The likes we just touched on, Snow Falcon there beat the likes of Shattered Love, etc. It was a really decent race, but for Snow Falcon, that's his time of year, and it's sort of things you need to take into account, especially for the months from June up until early to the middle of October, perhaps. But at the time, nothing really, at that sort of time in October, nothing really screams to me that you should be following it. So the fact that, Put the Kettle On was a missed horse, I wouldn't worry too much about that, to be honest, going forward.
No, and that's the thing with this time of year, because we've waited so long for some proper jumps action. I know I always feel like it, and it's quite easy to get carried away early on. We'll see as the episodes go on, the horses that we saw run, and then when you put a few anti-post bets up with your stuff on Twitter, there's horses that I've mentioned that I had geared towards something. So we'll be talking about this as much as we can, like it was at the time, not knowing what we know now. But you'll see in this first episode, there'll be very limited amount of stuff that when we were watching it, we were thinking about Cheltenham. However, that said, we can move on to that Chepstow meeting. I was there for both the days for it. On day one, Time Hill won the Persian War Novices Hurdle. Now, this was, I think in my write-up I put in there, I talked about a Nichols horse that was a little bit punty, and it didn't quite work out for him. But I did say that Time Hill, when they first priced it up, was probably the one with the bumper form behind Envoy Land from the previous season. With the price he opened up, I think we could get 9-2 about him. And I was pretty impressed with how he won at Chepstow. Now, given the fact that it is so early in the season, I wasn't already thinking about him for a potential Cheltenham Festival winner, especially how the fact he was so geared towards the Albert Barnet after. But I thought it was a nice enough performance, and I did think at the time that Fiddler on the Roof was one to take out of the race as well. think it was Trevelyan's Corn. I've just pulled up on the screen now. Was the one that I thought for Nichols that could have a bit of a squeak. He had a decent enough record in there, but it just looked a pretty decent performance from Time Hill, I thought, and I did think that Fiddler on the Roof pushed him well enough to suggest that he was a horse that was going to be going places in the next couple of months.
I actually wasn't that impressed. I was there with you as well at this meeting. I actually wasn't that impressed with Time Hill. I don't know why. I just felt like Fiddler on the Roof was, like you said, was one to take out the race at the time. Yeah. And I just thought he faded towards the end. And I thought for sure drop back to 2 miles would suit him going forward. But the 9, I was more impressed about the 9 to 2 that was on offer for Time Hill the night before. So the money came. He went off at 9 to 4. He wasn't going off as a certainty. I mean, he obviously progressed throughout the season, but at the time, I thought he just sort of ground it out. I wasn't overly impressed in terms of where he placed in the Champion Bumper the year before. I expected a bit more, but I suppose that's probably my fault because he's not really a flashy type of horse. He is that sort of just grinds it out and gets it done, doesn't he, as we see as the season went on. So maybe I was expecting a bit too much or a bit more of a flashier performance, which probably explains why I wasn't that impressed with it. But look, it was a good performance, especially now looking back at it.
Yeah.
But at the time, I never thought of him as a real contender going forward at the big festivals.
And I know obviously we're talking about it as it was at the time, but obviously we know now he actually did go off favourite, didn't he, for the Albert Bartlett in the end. At the beginning of the season, where we've got these horses that it's nice to get excited and we try and calm ourselves down a little bit. I sometimes find it a bit difficult to find where the level should be. Sometimes I might underappreciate a horse just for the sake that it's so early in the season. But I thought he ran well enough there. It's the Persian War typically is like an okay-ish race, but you might not be looking at like future festival winners. And obviously in this instance, he didn't go on and win it anyway. But there was a few other races there that were quite interesting. One of the ones that we were most excited about seeing was Reserve Tank in his chasing debut. It's worth mentioning as well that it's not on this list of races to go through, but Ardlethan won the 3 mile novice chase that weekend when Lisnagar Oscar made his chasing debut. Lisnagar Oscar was just so poor that day. It ran the time after, I think it was against Blacklock, it ran after that, and I was happy to take on Lisnagar Oscar after that. And again, not really thinking further forward, but you couldn't imagine that you've seen a bloody Stairs hurdle winner getting beaten in a novice chase at Chepstow at the beginning of the season. It just shows how far away it is from the actual end of the season, doesn't it? So yeah, Reserve Tank's performance, I know exactly how I felt straight after the race. I'm going to go first, because obviously Jarvis Plate did go and win. I think he was the outsider of the trio, wasn't he?
Yeah.
How did you feel during, after, and then about even another 20 minutes after?
I was excited to see him. Let's start from the beginning. I was excited to see him at the beginning. That's why we went to Wales to go and watch it. I was excited to see him. He came through the paddock. I remember it like just that. He's such a good-looking horse. He looked fit. He looked ready to go. He was jig-jogging on his toes. He looked a good thing. I mean, Jarvis Plate looked like he was carrying a bit of condition. And Posh Trish, would have had to really improve quite a bit to beat Reserve Tank on the day. After the race, I was just deflated, really. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting of Reserve Tank, but just the overall feel of the day. A lot of people were there to see him. Everybody was expecting this electric performance, and we sort of felt baffled. I think you agree after the race, like we couldn't really decide whether it was fitness, but then on looks in the paddock, we thought, look, he looked the best horse out of the three of them. He looked the fitter horse. He looked ready to roll. So that was obviously a question mark. And of course, in the race, Jarvis Plate was outpaced for the whole of the race. I mean, he clattered so many fences, was outpaced, and he stayed on stronger. So, I mean, if I hadn't had that view of him at the paddock that day, looking fit, I probably would have took that and gone, yeah, he probably weren't fit. He's tired in the closing stages. Made a mistake at the last, which he did. Got him really tight, and that was it. But that night I reviewed the race, and he gets in so tight to his fences, and he loses just a little bit of ground every single fence, clips the top, a little bit of ground every single time, and as soon as the pace quickened, that's when he struggled. So it was kind of like after the fact, it was kind of like, okay, that he needs to improve his jumping quite significantly here, because considering Jarvis plate has managed to clatter so many fences and then still outstay him at the line. Was a slight worry for me. Postrish blew up, after the last and just wasn't really good enough anyway, to be honest, at the business end. But it was a weird day, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is a very dramatic statement to make, but when like a horse suffers a really bad fall and you're not sure whether they're still alive or something, I genuinely felt like after the race, that's sort of how it felt. Like it was like, maybe it was made up to be a bigger thing than it was, but it was like such a shock because he was tanking as well, wasn't he, to that last one? Like Power looked like he had loads of horse left, and then he just found nothing. And you could give Jarvis Plate a bit of a squeak like pre-race just for the fact it's a free run refer, beginning of the season, all that sort of stuff. The ground probably might have suited him better than Reserve Tank, but like you say, he was so poor in the race. It was even more of a shock that he even came back to get him. I wasn't sure after. My first thought was just write Reserve Tank off. It was absolutely, how have you been beat by Jarvis Plate is what I first thought. And then I'm pretty sure in the same sentence I said to you, but then again, he does prefer spring ground and he travelled around and he looked good. But I flip-flopped so much with how I thought he ran. And then when I did take some time to think about it after, I had to just tell myself it's Jarvis Plate that's beating him, and Jarvis Plate didn't run very well. So I sort of kept it down a little bit and just thought, you know what, maybe Reserve Tank's just not as good as I was hoping he was going to be this season. But
yeah, he's one of those though, Reserve Tank. He's got that raw ability inside of him. Every time he lines up somewhere, he gets a little bit of support. But if he goes back over hurdles, he'd become of interest unless he's had some significant schooling over fences going forward now. Because, after I reviewed it that night, I was thinking to myself, even the next time he ran, I was thinking to myself, I might have got this wrong. But then he did show the same jumping ability, the same tendencies throughout his next however many runs in the season. So it was disappointing, but he was the big draw on the day, wasn't he? The big draw for us to go there.
Absolutely. And the thing after the race as well that swayed me again, so I was up and down whether I know it's very early in the season to write a horse off, but someone like him, I'd imagine a lot of people would have thought of as a potential JLT horse when it comes to the festival. They're already thinking those sort of targets for him. If not there, he might do the business at Aintree. And I was just confused with it, didn't particularly like it, and I just thought to myself, well, he's not going to win anything at Cheltenham. And then Paddy Brennan in his post-race interview said the horse to take out that race is Reserve Tank. I'm thinking, you just spanked him, and now you're saying that he was the best horse in the race for whatever reason. He's the one to take out. Maybe he's blown up. And it's not very often you get any jockey that after a race gives a comment to someone else in there. Like it's such a flattering compliment that I just thought, you know what, maybe he can stay on the pile of potential ones. But
should we just mention before we move too far away from that Chepstow weekend? We just mentioned the handicap that Flash the Steel one.
Of course, yeah, because there was a winner in them, isn't there?
There was, and do you know what? If you take anything away from this episode, take away that this race is definitely worth noting going forward. In the past, so many good horses have started out here to go forward through the season. I mean, just look at, for instance, last year, Champagne Court went out and won umpteen novice chases. Imperial Aura, Cheltenham Festival winner. Indefatigable went off at 20-1 here. One at the Cheltenham Festival. Bold Plan won at Hot Handicap. Green the Team was in here. There are so many useful horses that start their season here in this handicap company, whether they go over to novice chasing that straight afterwards or it's just a fitness spin or what. But even when you go back through this race through the years, there's been some really, really good horses starting out in this race. Ones to follow going forward. Not blindly, of course, but just whatever they're going to do. These horses, these handicappers, are going to be out here at the first weekend and the opening weekend, and you definitely want to get your eyes on him before anybody else does. So note this race down, definitely.
I agree, yeah, and it's a good job you did bring this up as well, to be honest, because this is one that it's good because we know now what we know for the end of the season. But you are right, it is typically a handicap that goes quite well. Last year's renewal as well, like I remember watching it, like how fast did they go at the beginning?
Oh yeah, you visually could see it was ridiculous.
But I don't think it's. It would have somehow it would have affected the result because the ones that went too fast obviously ruined their chances. But the ones that did come through and win, like you say, with Imperial Aura, all of those sorts of things, they weren't like they. I don't think you could take anything away from them just because the jockey's got it right setting out the back.
No, definitely not. But it's not even about the result of the race, really. It's about the fact that trainers they want to get their horse in this race out early, get them fit, and then kick on with the season. So it notoriously has, not necessarily the winner of the race, but notoriously, I mean, Holstone was 4th in this in 2017, along with Old Guard, Bags Groove, La Rochère. Like there's Allery, there were some really good horses that line up in this, and not necessarily from a punting perspective, as in and go and find the winner sort of thing, but going forward, keep an eye on those horses that have been running that race.
Yeah, and I think it's another one that's worth mentioning around there. When you just mentioned Holster there, you remind me of a Munir horse. What was the 4-year-old?
Torpedo?
Yes, Torpedo. So I said to you, didn't I? He won't win round here. And he packed up, didn't he? But that was the sort of thing when it's like quite early on in the season that you've got horses that we saw Grenadine as well. We get horses that might have a pop over hurdles right there and then go chasing after. So it's keen to see the ones they keep back over hurdles for a little bit longer. They've probably got something in the pipeline for it. Indefatigable that we've mentioned, I know we said we were going to keep it as it was at the time. I mean, I wasn't looking at that thinking it was a festival winner. I know that Indefatigable is probably better on quicker ground, or I think she is. But that weekend, Litigate, the bumper horse that's in the same ownership, I think it's a full brother to Indefatigable. That bumper horse was supposed to run in the bumper that's at Chepstow. It got pulled out because of the ground, because it definitely needed good ground. But that was one that I was very keen to see run. It didn't run. They kept holding it back. And then when it did make its debut, I did put it up on the page, bolts up at 16-1. Because it's the season opener, especially yards like Paul Nicholls, he classes as a season opener. You do get yards that have got the horses that are ready to go. And because it's Wales and you normally get some like give in the ground, it is like National Hunt going, isn't it? Lots of horses, the trainers will be sending nice horses here, won't they? But again, it's just important to not get too carried away with some of the early season form in terms of the winners, maybe. Yeah,
100% in terms of the winners. Also means don't write off those that have finished out further down the field. So
Darver Stars in here is the Fergus O'Toole Memorial Novice Hurdle. So obviously he ended up becoming one that was quite often mentioned as a champion hurdle potential. The fact that he was an 8-year-old but he was a novice, you might as well take your poke at the champion hurdle like they did with Moon Racer before. I'd still think if you're a novice you should stick to your own company, but never mind. I don't remember thinking at that weekend this horse is going to be winning a champion hurdle or even be talking about it, and I didn't even consider him for anything. I didn't consider that he was going to be as good a horse as he turned out to be, so I wasn't too interested in it. I think it was, I'm not sure whether it was that day. I think it might have been the day before over in Ireland, but there was one that we mentioned. I asked you a few questions at the beginning of the season, didn't I, at Chepstow? Daylight Katie won over in Ireland in a mare's race, didn't she? A mare's hurdle. And she was supposed to win like the price that she was well short, but she was like quite an exciting one at the beginning of the season. She was one I was quite keen to see next time out. It's definitely worth chucking in here as well now, if anyone is still watching after 18 minutes. That Daryl, when I was talking about certain horses, about how they were going to get on for the season, all those sort of things, and I said, give me a horse that you think is going to blow out. And it was at this point that you were worried about Altior. This was the time of the season where they were talking about they're going to go King George, where they were going to race first time up, all those sort of things. So we were starting to get the hype around the Christmas races, the big races coming up into the festival. And you already had an air of uncertainty about him then. So that was something to look forward to, but might as well just give you a little pat on the back for that one.
Thank you very much.
So of the races that are left in here, because we're not going to talk too much about the Cheltenham meeting, the Irish Daily Star Chase, where Jet won that. Jet was a big price that day. And I know Jet's a horse that you quite like. I don't know whether you were on, were you?
I can't quite remember.
And then
I backed when he was behind Duvan.
Yeah.
November.
Yeah, so just after that, wasn't it?
Yeah, just after that.
So there we go. Looking at that then, so we get to that Cheltmental race where Duvan comes in, which is in November. So I suppose as it happened at the time with Jet winning that performance, you were probably relatively impressed if you're going to be back in against Duvan.
Well, I was backing him each way we do. I mean, it was race specific really. Duvan had been off for 700 odd days or something, so it was race specific. I didn't think Monolith would like the ground, and then he was like 16-1, and you were playing for two places. It was a race-specific bet rather than a case of following him for the season.
With this particular race, this is for the elders, but you just tend to find that these are the elders that are held back. They're not Grade 1 horses. They're probably not Grade 2 horses, hence why they're running in the Grade 3. And although you might get one that looks like it's an impressive winner in there, you have to remember that it's only beating not even Grade 3 horses. So the actual winning margins and the performances can be probably a bit deceiving there. Foss Lass, Monsieur Le Coq won the Welsh Champion Hurdle. It's a race that year after year I'm not a massive fan of because it's a handicap and it's called Champion Hurdle. But Monsieur Le Coq looked a good bet for that last year, I think. He just had some decent form from when he'd run at Sandown the season before. He was in off of a nice enough mark. He did Julia Bige. I think Le Presien was the one that kept him up to his work, and that's probably the reason why he did win the Champion Hurdle, because any other horse I think would have gone past. But even before that race, when I put Monsieur Le Coq up to win the race, I didn't expect that he was going to go on and do anything after. He did run well in the Greatwood Hurdle at Cheltenham in the November meeting after. But yeah, Monsieur Le Coq in the Welsh Champion Hurdle, I just think that's the sort of race where you need to be looking at something that maybe for whatever reason at the back end of the previous season didn't quite get the job done. And then because this is quite a nice early season target for a handicap, I know that when we're taking on everyone, I feel like you want to be looking for a horse that still got a bit of improvement in it, but you have to consider the fact that it's going to win a Welsh Champion Hurdle, and that is probably as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a very weird race, that Welsh Champion Hurdle, because you tend to find that it's a similar type of horses that are going over there for that race. I mean, if you can find something that's a little bit less exposed than a lot of the older horses that tend to run the race year after year, it could be a good bet. But you've got to remember to keep that's at a level, the Welsh Champion Hurdle, as opposed to the Champion Hurdle. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And the thing with those horses are because it's a handicap. I'm not saying this is just the fact that the horse that definitely wins it, and saying it's necessarily the profile, but if you've got a potential Champion Hurdle horse, their start of their season isn't going to be in October. The start of their season isn't going to be in a handicap because they're rated so highly. So that just to level it out, although it's called the Welsh Champion Hurdle, it's a handicap. And then there's Kempton as well, which is a meeting that I go to every single year. Pacify ran there, Silver Street, they're both featured in here. This must be the meeting where Itchy Feet ran, because that was behind Silver Streak, I think. Well, I mentioned it after the time in a little video about that, but Itchy Feet at the beginning of the season, he was the last horse to come out of the parade ring. Ollie Murphy was frantically running to the pre-parade ring. I'm 100% adamant there was something up with Itchy Feet that day. He bled at Cheltenham, didn't he, in the festival, so he's he was poor that day. And he did go and run okay in a chase after. It was one of those things that's why I like getting to the races. This is the sort of stuff that you don't see, because we saw Itchy Feet there. He won at the meeting the year before in the novice hurdle, flying, and he was all good. But there was for whatever reason there was something up with him. He was very, very late out of the pre-parade ring, and I don't know what it was, but you get that sort of thing by being there. I kind of played it down a little bit because I fancied Itchy Feet stupidly. I should have gone for Silver Streak. He was Champion Hurdle third, wouldn't he? But I don't know. I fancied it, Itchy Feet, and I sort of downplayed the performance from Silver Streak off the back of that, thinking, well, the only reason he won is because Itchy Feet wasn't fine. All those bits and pieces. It wasn't the greatest feel, but he spanked him, didn't he? Won it in good style. And probably, considering he was a Champion Hurdle third the year before, and we know that the Champion Hurdle looked relatively open, I think a few people were probably thinking the same sort of thing, wouldn't they? That he might be an each-way shout for a Champion Hurdle.
Yeah, but I mean, he's a solid enough horse, isn't he? I mean, how he went off at 9-4 for that race is madness, really.
And I think he was definitely bigger during the day as well, or the night before. But yeah, when you look back in hindsight, should have been the bet of the weekend, shouldn't it?
Oh yeah, especially with people have to try to give him £2. I don't say £2, but giving him weight. But yeah, I mean, Grand Santi was obviously in there, but Silver Streak really should have been favourite for that race. But again, you're going to find around this sort of time of year, you're going to find a lot of these little listed races where there's not a lot of competition, and you might have someone like, for instance, let's just give a hypothetical scenario this year. You might have someone like Pentland Hills in there who decides to finish off his race this year, and then everyone goes, Pentland Hills for Champion Hurdle, Pentland Hills for the Champion Hurdle this year. And you've got to really make sure you take it into context about what they're actually beating. I mean, like you say, Silver Streak ran away from these easily by 8 lengths. But put it into context and what he's beating, obviously Itchy Feet wasn't running, up to his level, and then you've got Looks to beat the judge, who's been beaten on the flat off marks of 70, whatever, you know what I mean? So you do have to take it into context, if you like.
But it's, I think as well, with the fact that we're saying that it is like a listed race, those bits and pieces, and the horses like Kempton Hill probably is a fair one to mention, is a term of target. But you can look like, again, looking back at it now, it's easy to say, and I took it all for granted at the time because I was just bitter about Itchy Feet. But Silver Streak had probably been, like, that had been a plan probably since after the Champion Hurdle. They probably thought this is a race, we'll definitely get him fit for it. Not saying he would have been 100%, but you've got enough time from October for him to have a bit of a breather if he needed to, and then rebuild up again for the Champion Hurdle, haven't you?
Yeah, and they'll do exactly the same this year, I'd suspect. But Silver Streak, lovely also.
Absolutely. So I will just mention it just because it wraps up the episode nicely, but Pacified does deserve a mention in there because the novice hurdle there, the year before Itchy Feet did run in it, and obviously he ended up running well in the Supreme. Grant Sonson, you mentioned he was in there. It was a bit of a farce of a pace that year when it was run. He just dawdled round, and then I downplayed what Itchy Feet did. Maybe it's the start of the season, me taking it a little bit too much, but Pacified, to be fair, like hacked up, and I again downplayed what he was doing, and he actually ran quite well after that. But at no point did I consider that he'd be competitive in graded races or do anything like that. And he did end up second at Cheltmental hanging there, didn't he? But yeah, it didn't look a great race at the time. It looked like it was a fair enough performance, but he hadn't beaten much, and I feel like it probably played out like that.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people got excited about his profile. He was another one that had been winning between June and July through September, unbeaten going into that race, wasn't he? And then you see his next start at Cheltenham, for instance, the moment he stepped up in grade, it was comfortably held by, a horse called Hang in there. Yeah. But you can, again, get, there was a lot of hype at the time around Pacified after that race, saying, oh my God, he's this, he's that. But you need to take into context the fact that Summer Jumps, I know we keep saying it, but it's only because we're at the first episode, that Summer Jumps is completely different to the winter game when the big guns come out. So they do tend to pick up a lot of races, and they can do it impressively. I mean, Pacified won one of his races by 30 lengths in the summer, But put it into context, is when he starts to enter the winter, he hasn't won since, taking on better company, So just like you say, I think this episode really been about keeping a level on it, early in the season, especially through the summer and into the early winter, probably keeping a lid on it a little bit, being calm about horses. If they're winning by 5 or 6, 7 lengths, then you need to be asking yourself why they're winning by 5 or 6 or 7 lengths, as opposed to getting the hype and going, what, I'm backing that for Cheltenham. Because a lot of people will be doing that. They'll be seeing a horse win a listed race, for instance, backing him straight away from the Cheltenham Festival, not realising that. And that's all with all due respect to people. I'm not saying but not realising they're not taking on the calibre of horses they will be facing in the summer. And then you find that those horses don't win again, and they're not even entered at the festival. So
it is hard, isn't it? But it's so exciting. At the start of the season comes in, we get ourselves a bit wound up. But you'll see in the next episode that once we get into November, it's not that far away, and we have some stonking action. So that's going to wrap up the first episode. As I say, if you couldn't watch the video stuff at the beginning of the horses, you could watch a review of that and on the Facebook page. That's got a link to it in there. Any comments, feedback, anything like that, we always appreciate any of those bits and pieces. As I say, we can't cover every single race that we run, every single horse. We're trying to pick up the ones that we feel are most relevant. We are doing it sort of off the cuff, so we might be missing a handful of things. But as always with my page, if you've got any questions about any horses or you want my opinion or anything specifically, then just drop a message. If you are watching still this far, then you might as well subscribe to the YouTube channel, get those numbers up. And I'll put a link up for the second episode when that's published too. Thanks very much.